Hi friends, it's Lee and Britta here, and we want to share with you today this idea, this way of working, this concept that we use a lot in the work we do at CORE, which is the three selves. It's one of our foundational tools, and it's been really, really helpful in the work we do in helping people grow and change and embrace the best version of themselves. So we want to share a little bit about the three selves with you, and just start off by saying that, you know, it is part of our human experience. If you're like us, you probably note there are at least two parts of your human experience, right? Humanity, our humanity is really beautiful. Life is beautiful, right? I mean, it's a joy. It's rich to be a human being. All the gifts that we experience, all the celebrations, all the joys. Sometimes we just feel that goodness of life, right? And that's not all there is. And there's also what we call the human condition, or is sometimes called the human condition. So in addition to that beauty and that goodness, there's also this challenge with life, that life is really hard. It is often hard to navigate the challenges of life out there and in myself. And we find ourselves sometimes doing the things that we wish we wouldn't do, and not doing the things
that we wish we would do.
Yes, that we wish we would do. And so this is part of the human condition that seems to be universal to everyone. And part of the work we've done for so many years is helping people navigate this, you know, embracing the goodness of our life and navigating and transforming the challenging bits. And so that leads us to this conversation today that we want to share with you, which is this beautiful way of working, which is the three selves. It's something we came across maybe 10 years or so ago that really gives us a lens and a prism, a way of looking at our human experience, both the goodness of it and kind of the challenge or the brokenness of it, and how can we navigate it and embrace the goodness. So the concept of the three selves, I'll give you the short history here. The short history, it comes from a German psychologist, Franz Rupert. And Rupert created this notion of the three selves, which we've adapted a bit from the way he uses
Quite a
it.
bit, yeah.
Yeah. And he created this based on the work of Bert Hellinger and family constellations. So this is only important so you get a bit of a history, that family constellations is a way of working with our human experience in family systems and internally. And Franz Rupert took this very complex and very wonderful way of bringing healing to family systems and to individuals, and he really focused it on just how do I bring this into working with individuals so that we can heal what's broken and help them embrace the best version of themselves and really grow into the fullness of their humanity.
Yeah.
So that's the three selves. It's an adaptation of family constellations. And I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, and we're both trained in family constellations. When we were in this training quite a while ago, our teacher taught us about these three selves. Both Lee and I sat at the edge of our seat, and we looked at each other and we were like, oh my God, this explains.
This is it.
This explains the human condition. Everything that we knew for decades already kind of brought it all in this simple system, and to understand what's going on with us, because especially what's going on with us when we act in dysfunctional ways, and when there's patterns that keep repeating themselves, and when we look at our behavior and we're going, what are we doing? What am I saying? Why am I being so weird? You know, so it brings compassion and truth to our human condition in a way that I've never quite heard in such a simple and effective way. Because if you haven't noticed yet, most of our behavior, particularly our dysfunctional behavior, our behavior that we're not so proud of, comes from the unconscious. There's only maybe 10% of it that comes from the conscious mind and what we consciously decide to do, and the rest of it comes from the unconscious. So we need to address, because the unconscious always wins. Always. Have you noticed that?
And that's the part of us that when we find ourselves, why am I in this rut again? Why am I in this habitual behavior again? Why do I keep tanking my relationships? Why can't I seem to step up? We're not choosing that behavior, right? Yeah. So it's being driven, and what remains unconscious will continue to drive us. So part of the gift of this way of working, we'd say, is to bring what's unconscious to consciousness.
Yeah. And that's the path of transformation is always that, to bring what's unconscious to consciousness so that we can change it. And so let's talk about these three selves.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the three selves. The first self we might want to talk about is the survivor self. This is a part of us that we all have. This is the part of us that the number one function of the survivor self is to protect us from pain. I mean, life is painful. That's that part of that human condition. Life is painful. And we learn as a child, we adapt, we adopt, we adapt, we create survival strategies, right? And they are ways to protect us from the pain of childhood, the pain of life not meeting us where we wanted to be met. And these are survivor strategies because they help us as a child get by.
Yeah.
Because life is hard, you know, for some of us, very hard as children. And so it helps us survive. The problem with the survival strategy is it doesn't allow us to thrive. It works as a child. It doesn't work as an adult. And the way this shows up in our life is when we are feeling tight, right? So, well, here's one example. So we may be feeling tight or shut down or withdrawn. Maybe that's my survivor strategy that still shows up for me today.
Disengaged.
Yeah, disengaged. Maybe my survivor strategy is to please. I'm the one who's always pleasing everybody, right? So maybe you find yourself, I'm the pleaser. I got to make everybody happy. And somehow it's never making me happy, and it's never bringing fullness to my life. That's an indication that we're probably in a survivor strategy. All of these things are ways to help us get by and to protect us in the best way this part knows how from pain. And I think one of the sharpest survivor strategies that most of us have is what we call the inner critic. And the inner critic is that voice that constantly critiques. And for most of us, it's quite strong, right? This part that says, you can't, you shouldn't, you're not good enough, no one loves you. You know, whatever these early messages we may have gotten in the first bit of our life, the first 10, 12, 20 years of our life, they just keep getting repeated over and over. And that's a survivor self part. You see, it's protecting us, wanting to keep us safe. But you see how that part left on its own just keeps driving us down. And it keeps us from actually stepping into the fullness of our humanity. So the one thing I'd say about the survivor self is to recognize, you want to recognize that you have one, right? Everybody does. You have it. We have it. I have it. And so the first thing I want to say is, I got a survivor part, and start to be curious about how it's showing up in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And so what is it protecting us from? Now we get to the wounded self. So you could say the survivor self has all these strategies to keep us safe, to protect us from experiencing the pain when it actually originally came into existence, right? When we were little and experienced pain in an overwhelming way. And some of us, you know, for some of us it was big traumatic events, for some of us it was little events, but in any case we experienced some kind of pain or suffering that we couldn't deal with as children. So this part of the ego structure came in that said, okay, I know how to deal with this. Like, I'm going to start pleasing everybody. And or I'm going to start checking out and being invisible and never make any trouble. Or I'm going to start being a rebel, right? All these strategies are covering this wounded self, which is an inner child part, really. The wounds are always the deepest the younger we are. And they're raw. So how does this feel? Raw, vulnerable, primal. Like it's an emotion that's a strong feeling that is real, that grief, anger, fear, these are all sadness, deep sadness. So it always feels vulnerable. It feels like we're getting somewhere that feels a little scary if we don't know how to be with that, right?
Yeah.
And that's when we were children and it felt so scary, the survivor self came in and said, okay, I'll take over, right? And the problem with that is it's still taking over, right?
Yeah. I was just going to put loneliness out there. So
Yeah.
sometimes for some of us, that sense of longing or loneliness, maybe you sense that sometimes in your life, right? And you know that there's a wounded part in there.
Yeah, and it's actually good to feel these feelings. When these feelings come up, when they get triggered, you know how it can feel so awesome to have a good cry? Finally. And if you feel so much better afterwards, it's okay to feel feelings. They all have a wave, they have a beginning, you know. a middle and end, and then they're done. But the survivor self is keeping us from feeling those feelings and comes up with all these strategies that actually don't work.
Yeah, and I think it's important to notice that we want to have compassion for the survivor self, and we definitely want to have compassion for the wounded self, right? So we want to recognize that. But the challenge is neither of those parts really teach us how, guide us into leading our lives as adults.
Yeah.
These are childhood parts that came online as children, and they go with us, but they don't know how to, as I said, thrive in the adult world. Like the little survivor part just is hurt, right? And the protector part, that survivor self is...
You mean the little wounded?
Yeah, the little wounded. Yeah, thank you. The wounded part is hurt, and the survivor self is doing its part to protect that. So that leads us to the third part, which is really the healthy self. The third part, the healthy self. So...
Yeah, so the healthy self, thank God we have that, right? This is what we're born with, is who we truly are, and it can never be destroyed, right? It can only be covered over by these strategies, by these wounds of life, right? But it's always there. That's the good news. And we can always recover it. We can always access it more deeply. It's all of our essential qualities of goodness and wisdom and love and compassion and truth and honesty, and so much of our true self, right, lies within the healthy self. And that's where our liberation lies, in recognizing it and strengthening it, in reclaiming it. So you could say, if the survivor self always has a grip, it's always tight, it's always tense, it's always scared, really, the healthy self is always open. It's not attached and gripping. It's open, it's loving. It can be strong, but it's never harsh or judgmental. So that voice in your head that tells you you're no good, or that tells you these other people are no good, right? It's not your healthy self. It's your survivor self trying to protect you, right? So the healthy self can be discerning, of course, but not harsh and judgmental and ruthless and merciless as the inner critic can be.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat something Britta said, which really struck me, is that your healthy self can never be destroyed. It is who you truly are. So if you're listening to this right now and feeling really identified with your survivor self, and my goodness, I've got all these ways of interacting in the world that aren't helpful, or that little wounded part that you're maybe really in touch with, the sadness that you've carried for a long time, just know that the most true part of you, the part of you that is the immortal, so to speak, part of you, is that healthy self part of you. That's the part that you are most truly, and that you are as a mature adult. It's always in us. And our work is to embrace, turn towards, and cultivate that healthy self.
Yeah.
Right?
Because when that meets the wounded self, true healing happens. And when that meets the survivor self, true ego relaxation happens. Like the survivor self relaxes and lets these beautiful qualities of love and gratitude and compassion and wisdom and all this beautiful stuff, all these essential qualities in us come forth into our life. And that's what CORE is all about, to help you reclaim that healthy self, relax the survivor self, and heal and transform the wounded self. So we have a little inquiry for you.
Yeah, we're going to be talking more about these in the coming weeks, so we'll go deeper into all of these areas. But right now we want to leave you with a question to take with you. The inquiry is to ask yourself throughout the day, especially when you're triggered or feeling reactive to something, or angry or hurt, or in some way what we might call charged or triggered. Ask yourself, what part of me, what self is driving the bus right now? That's the inquiry. To ask yourself, to pause and ask yourself, what self is driving the bus right now? Am I sensing these protections and defenses and these survival mechanisms that I know so well? Or am I sensing the sadness or wounded part, right? Or am I sensing the part of me that can witness this and hold it and knows my own goodness in spite of all of it, with all of it? Is my healthy self online right now? And so as you bring yourself to this inquiry, we invite you to do it with compassion. This is really important. This inquiry is not a test, and it's not a judgment. It's an inquiry. that you can bring with compassion to whatever's happening. And here's a little secret to the inquiry. Anytime we inquire with compassion about anything, we are engaging on some level the healthy self, right? So the beginning of transformation is to bring yourself into this discovery process and start tracking with compassion. What self is driving the bus now?
Yeah, with compassion, with sincerity, and with curiosity. Like really an open mind and just wondering, this voice in my head right now, where's this coming from? What part of me is speaking?
Yeah.
Right? So this is a beautiful, open-ended inquiry that we want to leave you with.
Yeah, so we'll leave you with that for now, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.